I really appreciate you coming down. Anthony speaks very highly of you, and yeah, thank you.
Sure, it's great to be here, man.
Yeah, man,
Awesome.
yeah. So you must have just got back here in the nick of time. Did you
Yeah, so it was funny. It was super funny. I was on the biggest job of my life. Brought my whole family over. And it was a fantastic, but learning opportunity. Challenging as all hell.
And whereabouts?
This was in Cape Town.
Cape Town, yeah.
Right? So it's great. I'm doing this big thing that I can't really talk too much about, except to say that, oh my God.
It was a big step.
It was a big step, right? And so around December, my partner tells me, she's like, yo, there's this thing happening in China. They're shutting down the international travel for China. And I was like, babe, you and I both know that's a big step for China.
Yeah.
China doesn't mess around when it comes to their money.
Yeah.
And I was like,
you could read the writing.
Yep.
Yeah.
But I was like, as for me, I just can't think about that right now.
Yeah.
I've got this thing to do.
Yeah, I got to keep going.
Yeah. So, fast forward to a couple of 2 months later, 2 months, whatever it is. And the producer steps in onto set and calls a big meeting on Monday. I'd been in post-production. I'd finished my block, or part, 2/3 of my block, and I'd been in post-production. And had one day to shoot before I continued on with post, right? There were a couple of directors on this job. And the producer calls a meeting. It's my first day back, and it's a hustle. The crew is all exceptionally tired. They've been dealing with another director and his energy, and then I come in with mine, and they're like, oh, Scott, we're not so sure about all of you and all that you're bringing. The producer steps into set, and he's like, listen, guys, so as you may well be aware, there's this, virus that's a pandemic. And it's Monday today, but on Friday we're shutting down the production. And it's going into complete hiatus.
Fuck.
And so I mean, I had two thoughts running through my mind at that time. The one was we were all standing pretty close together, so
We're all fucked anyways.
yeah, can we all just give it a little bit of space, right? But the second thought for me was, well, I've got my family here, and my partner's Australian. Our child is Australian. They don't have their South African papers as yet.
Right.
We've got a limited amount of time that we can easily all be here in South Africa. And so we called our flight agency, or, our flight company, and we're like, yo, can we move our tickets forward? And they were like, yeah, sure, no problem, right? They moved it forward. And then there was an announcement by the president. We went on to Johannesburg, where I was attending my sister's wedding. And as we arrive back in Cape Town, we switch on the radio randomly. We never do that. And then there's this announcement by the president to say, well, look, it's a state of emergency, state of crisis, and the country is shutting down. And the implication for that was that our tickets were outside of the time.
Oh.
So we had to make arrangements to buy additional tickets.
Right.
And get out. And we were literally on the last flight out of South Africa. So our flight was at 10 p.m. and the lockdown was instituted from 12. And when we arrived at the airport, there were all these messages on the board saying flight delayed, or, and this was a pearl, flight delayed indefinitely. So we're like,
just cancel it.
yeah. They're like, no, we're not canceling it. It's delayed.
Just string you on with a little glimmer of hope.
So that basically means you can do with whatever you want with that information. You can stay here, you can go home, but really it doesn't matter.
Bricks.
The flight, whatever. So it was interesting times.
Yeah, right. So where are you at with that then? I mean, I guess if you made it out and the project is there and they don't foresee them opening up flights for however long, I mean, is it...
It's interesting times.
Yeah.
Yeah. These
Get
are
on a ship.
Yeah. Well,
Actually, funnily enough, I used to work at sea on ships, and I sailed from Cape Town to Albany in Australia.
Wow, Albany, that's down in Western Australia, right?
Yeah, southwest.
Ah,
yeah,
wow.
yeah. 2.5 weeks. And
That's not that bad, right?
It's not that, 13 knots flat out.
Is that going with the current, or is the current just... how does it affect... if you went the other way, if I had to go from Albany to Cape Town, and I'm seriously thinking about that, how long does it take?
Look, it depends. Most if you were doing it on a cruise liner or something like that, they probably do 20 knots.
Okay.
But I'm on a oil and gas support vessel, which, I mean, 12 knots is actually pushing it.
Wow.
You're probably closer to 9 or 10.
Wow.
But it's around the clock, obviously. And I don't know what the currents are like, but currents do play a big, part of it. If you looked at your vessel from a bird's eye view, a lot of the time it's moving forward like this, with enough momentum to fight the current, but also push it forward. It's never normally just cutting through in a straight line.
Oh, I
You
get
see
you.
planes come in and they do that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Same deal.
It's funny you say that, man. Cape Town to Albany, I've got this mad passion, and it was part of the thing that I was going to do after this job finished, which is motorcycles,
Right.
and to travel from Cape Town to Cairo. That was my big present to myself.
Oh, wow.
I was like, Scottnes, you're done this job. It's been really great. And now, while all the circumstances are right, let's do what you've always wanted to do. Let's get on a bike and let's go up to see the rest of the continent and go up to Cairo. And then, Corona. So maybe your idea of sea travel is the
Sea
next
travel,
thing.
yeah. At least you won't come across anyone.
Well, you hope not. Otherwise, pirates and stuff.
Yeah, do you know what? Those waters are actually, there's nothing happening down there.
Okay.
Yeah, it's Somalia, obviously, is a fucking nightmare.
That's right.
And the Singapore Straits
Oh,
through
really?
there in Jakarta, and that can be pretty bad. Somalia is the fucking epicenter, though. Mm-hmm. But through there's nothing happening.
Okay.
It's
That's
just
all, that's
fucking,
all good.
we didn't see anyone or
Really?
anything for the whole time.
Is it confronting? And I don't mean to take you off track, but is
No.
being out there alone on the water?
No.
Oh, really?
Some people, yeah, you definitely get a lot of seafarers come through, and even though they've been at sea for years, when you hit those kind of pockets, if they've got anything that's going on at home or whatever, can fuck them up.
Yeah, right.
I had a good friend of mine who I convinced to go to sea, and his first trip at sea, because he was a cadet, was 3 months.
Wow.
And he was fucked. He
Really?
wanted off within a week.
Oh, wow.
So, excuse me. But I've actually, it's funny you say that, because through this whole thing, and I don't mean to give anyone who's suffering from depression or bipolar a spray, but if you've got a good deal and you've been bitching and moaning about isolation,
It's
shut the fuck up. Because honestly,
Really?
you know what I mean? You've got so much to do. I'm bored and whatever. But my time at sea definitely, I don't think I would be stressed out about lockdown, but I do attribute being in a cabin, because I wasn't very part of the gang
okay.
at
yeah.
sea.
Yeah, I
It's
get
like
you.
a bunch of racist, homophobic,
Right.
ex-cons, you know what I mean?
Right.
And I'm this like little art dude in his cabin drawing and painting and whatever.
Yeah.
So I was always the outsider. So I would be in my cabin all the time for 5, 6, 7 weeks. So,
Wow.
and it's like, a quarter of the size of this room.
Wow, that's crazy. It's funny you're talking about mental health. I got challenged on socials. And
Did you?
Yeah, I did. I did. I got challenged on socials, and it's the 25-day push-up challenge. 25 push-ups, 25
that kind
days.
of challenge.
Yeah, right.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's in support of mental health and PTSD, etc., and suicide. And it's weird. It's really weird how doing anything and committing yourself to this is the end time is tricky, because as soon as you start, you get, both positive and supporters, and you get naysayers. And the supporters are all like, yeah, go on, do your thing. It's good, which is cool. And that's talking about, mental health. But the naysayers are like, oh no, your push-ups aren't low enough. And I was talking about this with Anthony.
Everyone's an Arnie critic.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I was like, dog, it's really not about how low my push-ups are. It's about
it's
mental
the
health.
intent.
It's about the intent,
Yeah.
And I guess, for me, and we're talking about, journeys. But for me, it's so interesting how when you've got your head set on a target, that's my goal. I'm reaching out to that point. There's gonna be, exactly, some supporters who are like, yeah, go on, dog, you're doing it, and they're gonna be people who are gonna cut you down. They're gonna they're gonna do it in such a flippant, offhand, and casual way that they don't realize how deep they might have cut you. Whereas for you, you're like, man, actually, this dream, this objective, this destination I have in mind is so important to me that your little offhand comment really shakes me. You know what I mean? And I think it's such an important lesson for me in how to keep on track.
Right.
You know what I mean? Just keep on going until it doesn't suit you anymore. But let that impulse come from within, as opposed to have
100%.
people coming at you.
Yeah, fuck those guys.
Do you know what I mean?
I learnt a valuable lesson years ago, and I don't know if anyone. It's not as commonly known as it should be. That we all actually have, in a sane mind, of course, emotional choice. So when you say, and I have experienced, my own. It took me fucking 25 years to get the courage to act.
Oh,
right? So,
really?
So I get it when people are going, you wouldn't be any good at that, or get a real job and all that kind of stuff. This is something that I've only just fucking wrapped my fist around in later life. But you have emotional choice. So when a naysayer, some prick in his fucking,
Keyboard warrior
in the dark at his mum's house, who's not doing any of the things that he wishes he could do, or she, you can make a choice to just not feel cut because they hold no weight. You know what I mean? I try to narrow down the opinions that matter. Does that make sense? So there's only a couple of people still left in this world that if they said, that was rubbish, dude, I still wouldn't feel cut, but it would get me. You know what I mean? And that would be like my acting coach, the first person who ever taught me, if we talk about art, if he said, Josh, mate, I don't know about this acting thing for you like anymore. I would be like, but no one else could really get through to me like that, because I understand that I can make a choice on a biological level to talk to my brain and tell it to keep up the dopamine levels as opposed to letting the cortisol rise and fear set in.
Yep.
I have a choice. And I never knew that before. So if I was like at sea and a girlfriend was fucking driving me nuts, I would dive into that, man. And I would not eat for a week, and I'd be fucking crying my eyes out every day. And I had a life coach who said, you don't have to choose to do that. Do you know that? You can choose to just go, I don't want to talk to you anymore. Bye-bye. And go exercise and eat food and be happy. You can choose to be happy. It's not just something that is washed over you and you reach out and grab it. You can make it happen within.
That's crazy. It's funny, we're having a great chat.
Well, I'm glad, man. This is good. Yeah.
But it's funny you talk about choice, So a couple of years ago, I was in a workshop, and the facilitator was like, we're talking about conflict resolution. And she was like, the person with the most flexibility in a negotiation wins, right?
Totally.
So if you've got the space to kind of, figure out more space for yourself in the negotiation, you win. And there's a piece of biblical scripture that really talks to me, and it says, all things work together for good for them that love the Lord, right? And in my conception, what that means is all things work together, meaning everything in existence works together for them that love the Lord or God or the Creator. For me, the Creator or creation is the act of making stuff, of possibility, right? And the way I understand that piece of scripture is that if I choose creation over just like, oh no, this small little view that's limiting and negative, then I've got access to everything, right? I am the most flexible in the negotiation with the world out there. Because I'm like, yo, man, actually, no, I can think about this different. And I saw it play out, actually, what you're talking about in that documentary, The Last Dance, Michael Jordan thing, right? So good, right? But I think what was so powerful, and it's the same thing that Kobe did with Mamba Magic, what's so powerful is he was like, yo, actually, I'm going to choose how I think about whatever it is that's happened, which is what you're talking about.
Yeah, 100%. He was so dialed in to what is only now becoming a little bit of common knowledge, and that is what I was just talking about. He was so fucking dialed into how much control he had over what was happening in his brain. Wow. Like that was in the way that he spoke about, just like he's already at the peak, and then this guy said this to me. Yeah. Oh, now I'm going to choose to be even better.
That's exactly
again and again. It's not like well, I just got to keep going.
No.
He's like, oh, oh, okay.
Yep.
You know, and then
And what's great is how he made it a game.
yeah.
So he was a game within a game.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So whatever was going on the court was one thing, but he was like, actually, I'm playing against myself.
Yeah.
And I'm choosing what my particular way to view the situation is right now.
Yes, it was an incredibly premeditated plan that he had for being great.
Right.
Just noticed you Jordans.
Oh shit! Yeah. That's right. I did that intentionally.
Yeah. I mean, fuck, I almost want to watch it again. You know, I'm
Yeah.
like sad that it finished. I was a massive Jordan fan as a kid.
Oh, were
and-
you? That's cool.
Yeah, and it's funny, and I'll sort of nip this one real quick. But you know, how old are you? You must
I'm 35 or 36 this year.
cool. So you remember pre-internet days?
Yeah, was that even a thing?
Yeah.
Or was it like a collective imagination?
Yeah. It's fucking strange. You can't tell people what it was like beforehand. But so when I was a kid, I would have started playing basketball when I was like 9 through to 16.
Right.
And all that time, Jordan was the man. And I don't even know how I came across Jordan, whether it was a kid at school or whatever. But you couldn't watch NBA on TV here in Australia. It wasn't a thing. You would just catch it in the highlights.
Yep. The sports package at the end of news or whatever.
Yep. Or basketball cards.
Yeah.
We were
I remember that. Yep.
We were very lucky and perfect that we had Luke Longley playing for the Bulls.
yeah.
So we had some kind of, and I actually did a sports camp with his brother who was playing for the local team. So I got to have a good chat. But you didn't have the internet where you could, watch all the games and find out what was happening. I had no fucking idea about that. I didn't know that they won 6 titles till I was an adult.
Oh,
years,
wow.
You know what I mean?
Right,
and he was
right.
my all-time sports hero.
Right.
So to watch that now was like, it was fucking just one of the coolest things as a childhood hero. I
Yep.
didn't know all this shit.
Yep.
And it was so great. So what, I'll make that transition back to film.
Yeah.
So you're back here now. What's the play? What's the move?
It's super interesting times, and I hope that this isn't disappointing. But I it was a full on and intense.
You're taking time out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And weirdly enough, I'm finding it now that I'm stepping slowly back into my creative process. And my process is super collaborative all the time, actually.
Right, yeah.
I think it's part of how I access my artistry is through other people.
Mm-hmm.
But I needed to take a moment to occupy my hands and not my mind in order to become more creative, right? So, as a director, my job is to really help artists, whether they are on set in front of the camera or behind, or technical people or writers. What I do is that I help take the greatness out of them and take that little bit of their greatness, match it with a bit of mine and the next person and so on, and we discover something super cool.
I don't think you can make a film without that, right?
No,
It's
you
just-
really can't. It'll just be
can't.
boring.
It's
Yeah.
fucking boring,
Yeah.
I thought, look, Quentin Tarantino, obviously, my number one film of all time is on par, Pulp Fiction and The Matrix.
Yep.
But, his comment when he won that thing, everyone talks about who they discussed their project with. I just did it all on my own.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, come on, man.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah, it's bullshit.
You got obviously you're an incredible writer, an incredible director, but your guys go out there and say those words, and not everyone
100%.
can say the words the way that they said the words.
Yeah.
It's a collaboration, buddy.
Yeah. You know what it is? I think there's this myth about, and it comes out of 1950s Hollywood culture, the golden age of cinema, of idolizing the director. And it's got to do with sort of, privilege, male privilege, white privilege.
Did you watch Hollywood?
I know, I haven't watched it.
You'll love it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's exactly
looking,
about that.
Is it?
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
wow. But, that whole idea of like the artistry and the muse is one person's and they are the champion or whatever. No, that's bullshit.
Yeah, it's
It's
bullshit.
an old way of thinking.
Yeah. That's the same with, I was a high fashion photographer for about 7 years.
Right.
And that still exists in the fashion world. And I don't know how that will transition, that the high profile, high fashion photographer or designer is God.
Yeah, right.
And I've always said that fucking photographer, I mean, he's got obviously, or she's got to be great like Annie Leibovitz with, there's definitely tweaking and what have you, but that really only exists for the people that need it. when you're that high profile, you're shooting pros.
Right.
And it's their genetic legacy or their energy or whatever that you're just a spectator on.
Oh, wow.
You really, really are. Like, it's like you say, well, film is different because the writing is there and the direction really is needed. But when you're just doing a portrait, I've always said this, if you had Kate Moss in her prime against a grey background with just the fucking sun trickling in, you could almost hand an iPhone to anyone and they would get a dynamite shot because she is the one that is carrying that thing through. That of course doesn't exist for everyone, but the high profile, high fashion photographers think that they are so fucking amazing. And I'm like, you're amazing, you're great, but you don't have anything without them.
Right.
You know, and you put someone out there, you this is a terrible thing to say, but you can't polish a turd, right? Like, if you're not photogenic, you're not photogenic.
Right.
You could be amazing in real life, but if you don't have that thing that happens in front of a camera, I don't care who you are. You're probably not going to get it.
Right.
You know, so I'm glad that is, like you said before, is pulling away from that idea in film where it really, really is a sum of all of its parts. Right. You know what I mean? Like, you can't have a good film without great writing. You can't have the one that gets missed in the lower tier of things is great sound.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You know, you need all of those things to be great.
Why are sound men and women so grouchy though? That's
because they're doing fucking this all day long. And their arms are burning,
I'm just joking. I'm not mad at you, sound people. I'm just playing.
Man, I admire what they do.
Yeah, of course.
Fuck that for a job.
Yeah,
I
that's
mean,
hectic.
and I'm reasonably fit, but
Right.
my shoulders would be dying. I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna change. Can I just like get coffees or something?
Right.
I reckon this is probably a good spot to segue because you've got probably about half an hour left. So the only reason you're here, but one of the reasons why Anthony put us together, and we chatted about this off camera. So for those of you listening, I'm not about to spring a film on Scottnes here. But about 18 months ago, I started writing a film about an anti-poaching unit in South Africa in the Kruger National Park. I was discussing it with a colleague of mine who was in Afghanistan, and he was going to go to Africa to become an anti-poacher. And just at that time, there was a lot of money in it through the South African government. And then a few things happened, like Obama banning the importation of trophies. So a lot of money dried up in the parks. And so that pay was decimated. So he decided to come home and become a real estate agent. But we were talking about it. I said, that's an interesting film there. And then as I dug a little deeper, I found out that they could directly correlate the like 1,000% increase in rhino deaths from like 72 a year to about 1,100 in 2007, 2008. Oh, it might have been 2010.
Did you say 70 a year to about 1,100?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. To a Vietnamese politician who claimed that he had cured his cancer with rhino horn.
Wow.
Just like that, they went from, let's just say $100 a gram or whatever it is, or $100 a horn. It's more than that, but it wasn't a lot, to $65,000.
Right.
Like, and bang, just like that, it has been a fucking bloodbath out there ever since. And I sort of thought, I'd heard about anti-poaching units who now have a license to shoot and kill and arrest and detain and interrogate. There's a film there. So yesterday, Anthony and I put together a pitch deck, and he said, well, I know a filmmaker in South Africa who may or may not be his brand, but I can connect you to.
Sure.
We're connected now.
What's
I
up?
have this pitch deck here.
Oh, look at this. Okay.
I did explain this to you before, but this is the first time this has happened on the podcast where there's an objective along with a conversation to potentially down the road work together. It's a big part of the podcast, and it's what I really hope for a number of people who come on here, that producers are listening or directors are listening and go, geez, that script that guy or girl was talking about, and it just scrolls up, is really, really great.
Okay, so I'll read is this the log line?
Yeah.
In order to save her family from extinction, a South African ranger must recruit the help of a wayward soldier, but the cost of victory is high and innocent lives are lost. Lookbook is dope. Treatment.
You don't have to read out the whole
Yeah,
treatment.
sure.
Yeah. Might want to bore everyone to tears, but so I'll give you 5 to.
Sure. So I'm just having a quick look.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. It's interesting, Josh. What's your takeout in wanting to make this project? What is it that you ultimately want to achieve,
Right.
or say?
Yeah. The one of the things that I found in my research, it's twofold. The
Sure.
ultimate objective is to shine a light on what's happening, because a lot of people don't realize just how fucking bad it is. They know that rhinos are always, had a sort of very tenuous balance and what have you, and anything great like that poaching exists and hunting exists. But no one realizes that if nothing happens, if they don't stop this within 8 years, they'll be gone completely. And what happens is if you jump online, you will see a shit ton of graphic material and a couple of great documentaries, and there's lots of campaigns, but it's hard hitting, which it should be. But often documentaries preach to the converted. You know what I mean? Like my wife is a vegan and a massive animal lover. There's no way she's going to watch that documentary because it's just too hard, and it's not in people's purview. And there isn't a film at all. There had been talk about films, but that has been made that is talking about this particular issue right now. What I would like to do is to dress it up and wrap it with all that cinematic magic, right? So that there's a love story involved, and that the Thomas, the character, the soldier who comes over to Africa, rescues a baby rhino, and they form a bond, and that's what compels him to stay. And then he gets entrenched in the unit, and ultimately he becomes a really integral part. But it's Rian, who's a mixed race South African woman, who becomes the leader of that anti-poaching unit, and they end up taking the fight to Vietnam off the books. And that's originally where the film started. I said, why doesn't someone just go and take this dude out, who's propagating all of this nonsense? So the ultimate objective is the people that the masses go and see a great film, and they are educated about this thing whilst seeing it. Not because you can get more people to see a dramatic action film than you can a documentary.
Right.
And hopefully, through collective consciousness, if the film's a real success, even the people in Asia who aren't a part of, wanting rhinos' horns as something to get their dick hard or deal with a hangover or fucking a trophy, are going, well, this ain't right. You know, years ago there was a book written called the 100th Monkey Syndrome. It was in the 80s, and it was about the objective of the book was to try and stop nuclear war between Russia and America.
Right.
And they were working on the basis of collective consciousness. And they derived that science from an island somewhere. I forget where it was. And this is very quick.
Cool.
There was an island full of monkeys, no human influence or what have you. And they were researching them and watching them, and they found out, they observed them open up a new kind of nut or something like that, or a fruit, through a means of dropping it from a great height.
Sure.
Then they had started observing this same fruit or whatever happening all around the world with no exposure to these monkeys at all. And then they sort of linked that and said, well, there must be this thing that people have suspected for a long time, that if enough minds are thinking about something at the same time, it will influence the people around you. And I think they would call it noetic science now, as a very loose term. But that's the idea. If enough people can see this in a way that is palatable for them, we can change this. And so then, to try and get this film, as someone who's a first-time writer and wants to play Thomas, the character that you saw, it needs to be... I spoke to a friend of mine who's a filmmaker. She was on the podcast, and I gave her the original script. And she said, the last thing the world needs is another white person trying to save Africa, right? And I was like, yeah.
That's been running through. I was like, shit, how am I going to, because this is exactly,
Yeah. So that's why originally Thomas was the lead, and we swung that around to make him support as a go-to for support. But it is a very real thing that's happening there, where ex-vets are coming over and just giving their time and their energies and risking their lives to try and change this thing. It needs to be an all-in effort to stop this. But yeah, so that's the last thing that the world needs. So this film needs to be made by Africans in Africa. I always said that when I became a professional artist, that my objective was to ultimately somehow do something good.
Yeah.
My mother has lived and worked in East Timor for the last 15 years, basically re-educating and nourishing all the malnourished children and their families. And she's done it hard, and she's been through, sort of domestic war there and the whole bit. And she was awarded the Medal of Honor of Australia it's not called Medal of Honor, but it's something like that. The Order of Australia.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
So I have a great, and I've been out there to document some of what she's done. And that was my first photographic job was to go out to East Timor and photograph what she was doing. I said, I'm not a people guy like that. I'm an animal guy. I always known that. And I would love to be able to do something to help.
Well, look, I think there are a couple of things to be said, Josh. First off, I've been reading a lot about how, as a species, humanity has decimated across the planet large mammals.
Yep.
Hectically, right? And the more people you have, the more of your large mammals are made extinct.
Yeah, and it's gone worse since COVID.
Oh, has it?
Oh, it's
I hadn't realized
crazy out there now.
Wow. Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing, right?
Yeah.
The second thing is the identity of Africans to the rhino specifically. I mean, you might not be aware, but a lot of African families identify and use as totem different species of animal to kind of talk about what their heritage or their lineage might be.
Right.
So you might have, there's a great Olympic long jumper from South Africa, and his name escapes me right now. But Mukwena is his name. And Mukwena means crocodile.
Right.
And so there were memes that came out when I think he won bronze or silver at one of the Olympics. When he won, there were memes coming out about him jumping over crocodile open mouths, right? Because that's how he does. But the rhino specifically is very powerful in this identification for Africans. In the post Iron Age, the Bronze Age, in sub-Saharan Africa was a kingdom called the Great Kingdom of Mapungubwe. In the Great Kingdom of Mapungubwe was massive trade evidence of massive trade between East Asia and Southern Africa that predates. It was part of when that Chinese emperor was bringing ships across.
Yeah.
And so you find like old bracelets, Chinese porcelain, gold statuettes, evidence in the kingdom of, how the royalty was buried and so forth.
They've tried very hard to bury that evidence here that it happened.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. There's Aboriginal caves full of paintings of Chinese people.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's interesting. And it predates, of course, European expansion and colonialism.
It's like 1081 sort of in there.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Wow, so interesting. But amongst those artifacts found, by the way, this place in Mapungubwe was hidden for like 200, 300, I don't know how many hundred years.
Wow.
And the only reason, so how it was hidden was that locals in the area believed that it was haunted, right?
Okay, right.
And the only way to get up to Mapungubwe, which is like there's a plateau on, above a valley, and a really steep incline to get up. And you can only get up there by, a route that is very precarious.
Right.
And for a long time, a large tree had been deliberately placed over this route in order to prevent people getting up there. And as a result of some deaths, of when this kingdom was like decimated for some reason we don't know, people have always believed that it's haunted. Anyway. So finally they find, this is a long roundabout.
Yeah, this is great. This is great, man. This is awesome.
So finally they find...
There's a film there too.
Yeah, there is. Finally, in the turn of the last century, a couple of professors from my alma mater, Wits University, heard about this local legend, and they were like, yo, let's go and check out what's going on. They happened to be white, but that's a different story. And they took some local... tribesperson, and he showed them, what was at the top. They convinced him with some money. And when they got up there, they found these ancient Chinese artifacts, the local artifacts. They found masses and masses of gold, because obviously South Africa, massive gold, and a golden rhino statuette. Now, this golden rhino has become, you're talking about your mother who won the Order of Australia, the golden rhino, I think it's the Order of the Golden Rhino.
Oh, okay.
Or the Order of Mapungubwe is the highest level that a civilian can achieve in South Africa. Okay, long story short, I think there's a lot of potential in this film project. I think the content is there. I think absolutely your friend is 100% correct. We are no longer, as Africans, wanting to allow ourselves to be perceived as needing help. We are completely empowered.
Right.
We have got complete agency, and we have got the skill and know-how and the attitude to speak about our own stories. And we're taking that space.
Yeah.
Having said that, though, of course, there is absolute power in collaboration.
Which is what we were talking about before.
So I think, it's definitely something that I'm interested in.
Great.
Let's make something.
Yeah, because look, from my perspective, all I want to do is all that I have done is get this to a place where I can hand it to the right person and go, okay, you take it from here. I'm going to be, like, for me, the only sort of real, and this is obviously for selfish reasons because I'm an actor trying to break through, is that I get to play a character in my film. It doesn't have to be the lead. If someone says, hey man, Chris Hemsworth has just put his hand up.
Sure.
Cool. I'll be down here. That's fine.
Yeah.
But I want to hand it to the right crew of African people. This producer that I've been talking with, she said the exact same thing. We said we have to take this to Netflix in Africa or someone like that who are really trying to invest a ton of money into African content. Don't try, like, it was never been a plan to try and make it here or anything like that. And also in terms of writing, I want, like, when I first started writing this, I got two South African women to come and sit with me and just go over some of the dialogue and some of the things that were being said and give the female character a much more of a voice that I could ever fucking do. Right. It's not up to, like, do you know what I mean? I don't want to be that guy who's writing about shit that he doesn't know. I would like to
because it will be whack. I mean, I think, and it's really important that we just touch on that.
Yeah.
The reason why is so that ultimately excellence is the end result.
Yeah.
Because if you've got access to a lived experience and you're writing about something then it's ultimately going to be better than if you're kind of sitting there being like, oh, Scott, I'm talking about whatever it is and I'm talking bullshit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
totally.
ultimately the end is a better product.
Yeah, 100%. I had a filmmaker on here last night actually, and we were talking about that in terms of writing what you know, or just being really creative and writing fiction and what have you. And I said, look, I know how much my like I just said, my objective has always been to try and help in this field. So that's what I know.
Sure.
So I'm going to write to the best of my ability and research like I would for anything as an actor, get it on the page, get it fine-tuned, and then give it that extra nudge with the people that do. But what I do know is that I'm heavily emotionally invested in this as an actor. So, I mean, countless times writing this, and not to say that I'm writing my own words and, God, that's good, Josh, and bawling, but the content is, and the research and the visuals that I've seen in order to get this far is heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking, and I would keep driving this home for as long as I can. Like, it has to be made. This film hasn't been made by anyone. I don't care who makes it. It's got to be made, though. You know what I mean? It's fucking... I can't imagine a world without them in it, and to think that they will be 8 years and they could be gone is fucked.
I was driving through, and this only happens in Africa, and it's like almost like, you know, when people say, "Oh yeah, I was riding my kangaroo to work," when people ask about Australia, but I was legitimately driving through an area to go to a job, and I was on a dirt road, and it was some like military installation. And because it's a dirt road, and I was in a sprightly little Hyundai, I was going fast, and I had the dust going behind me, and I was like, "Oh shit, this is so cool!" And I was like taking the corners a little bit quick, and I come around this one corner, and in the middle of the road is a rhino, female, large, and she's like standing. I'm like dead brakes, you know, screeching to her halt. Yeah,
I'm sliding, I'm sliding,
and there's a rhino. And off to the side in the bushes was a baby, and I was like, wow, like that is an image in my life. And I remember it was like sunset. I was going to this job, and I was like, fuck, I'm doing so much. I've got to get there. And then boom, in the middle of the road is a rhino. And I was like, man, I'm gonna remember this for the rest of my life. It would be so sad if
you don't get to see that again.
Yeah, another person doesn't have an opportunity like that.
Yeah.
One thing to note, though, Josh, is oftentimes people have a tendency to put on a pedestal our biodiversity in Africa, right? And it's challenging because biodiversity. Okay, it's challenging because human beings have, over the last 400 years or 500 or 600 years, removed ourselves from the biodiversity conversation.
Mm-hmm.
We are the thing. It's biodiversity over there, and then us as humans and our civilization.
Mm-hmm.
And that's false. Biodiversity is the relationship between animals and human beings. Human beings are part of the broader, you know, scope of life on the planet. And I think there's this tendency, especially for non-Africans, to want to hold on a pedestal animals themselves without how they relate to human beings. That's what's so powerful about your project, is that if it does it correctly, can bring the biodiversity through rhinos and other associated species and human beings, the human story, tragedy, heroic journey, bring that all together. And then what will happen, if it's done correctly, is that it will speak to humanity more broadly. Nkwame Nkrumah said, Africa it's not about whether you were born in Africa, but whether Africa was born in you. My brother, I think there's part of Africa that has been born in you. What that means is that Africa is not only for Africans, Africa is for us all.
Right.
Obviously, humanity.
Yeah, it started there.
Humanity's, we start there.
Yeah.
So
my friend Simone, who's South African, when she read it, she got to me straight away, and this isn't, I'm just tying it into what you said. She said, Have you spent time there? Have you been there? I said, I've only been to Cape Town for 3 days.
Right.
But ever since, I mean, lots of people feel that connection, I think. But for me, it was. And she said, well, you're writing this place like you've been there.
Right, wow.
So
I'm excited to read.
That was nice, like to hear, because once again, I want to be that asshole from across the sea who's writing about something he doesn't fucking know about.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the thing that really stuck with me, and certainly I think as a filmmaker or starting to become a filmmaker, is duality of the conflict and not just a straight up villain. And so your poachers are farmers, and actually I have Anthony to thank for this, and I've said this many times. As poachers, if you're on the fucking breadline and you don't know if you're going to make it till tomorrow in terms of money, food, shelter for your family, and you've got 5 kids or whatever, and a guy comes and taps on your shoulder and says, listen, mate, here's a gun and $60,000 if you go and get me a horn. And your kids can go to school and they can have clothes and they can do all these things. What are you going to do? Right? And I said that to Anthony. He said, mate, I would do terrible things to protect my child.
And that's powerful and tragic and even more nuanced.
Right.
In an African context, and I speak as a South African, in a South African context, can you imagine the disappointment post-liberation, 22 or 21 years later, where your countrymen have now taken power and you feel you are still on the outskirts of society and being catered for, and you feel like your agency has been taken away. And in this situation, you can't even say, oh, it's a white government and I've got no access.
Right.
There is this, possibility, presumptively, that you can get up into the higher echelons of power. But unfortunately, because of the way society is set up, you might not have that opportunity. So when you reach for that gun, you are taking some of your agency back and saying, no, actually, you know what, I'm going to do something for my child and my family.
Yeah.
And I'm going to make sure that they get a piece of bread in them. Right?
Yeah. But at the cost of their country and the fauna and the thing that they hold so dear.
Especially if you identify and you rightfully in a South African context can with the rhino as being your family totem. These are powerful concepts.
Yeah, and there's some really, because I was really fascinated to see just how deep the investigation or the strategy in order to stop this is going, which is really, really great. And looking at former poachers who are now rangers. So what happened a lot actually was rangers lost their paycheck because all of the game parks dried up. And then, well, they knew the park so well and they still had to provide, so they became poachers. And talking to some of poachers who'd gone back to being rangers or were in prison or what have you, talking about the psychological journey from when they first did it to, like vomiting after their first kill and devastation and depression to then greed and being transformed by that. That's really
interesting. Yeah.
Nuts too, because then you have someone who's institutionalized, and how do you turn them back?
Wow, that's crazy. That's great. That's a nice bad guy.
Yeah.
Or good guy, bad guy, good guy. But there's this like crack team of, and I don't know, the specific details, but there's a crack team of game rangers on the Trans Frontier Park. So the Kruger Park is like South Africa.
Vetpor.
Vetpor? Is it Vetpor?
So Vetpor is where this is kind of loosely based on, and that is, I think his name is Sean. They're all predominantly American, former Afghanistan, Iraq vets.
No, these guys are local South Africans.
Okay,
right?
so it might be pro-track.
I don't know. So these guys are like this crack team of game rangers who have got military training as well.
Yep.
And they're all local and they're just going out at it, and they see it as their duty to protect the biodiversity in the park. And they're mean, right? And it's a bilateral something between Mozambique and South Africa.
Oh, yeah,
right?
okay.
Yeah, so and they're killing it. It's really good.
Unfortunately, in the Kruger National Park, you can't shoot unless fired upon. But in Mozambique, you can straight up. If someone's in the park and they've got a gun or you can, whatever, they've got bushmeat, you can just fire on them. And so you have ProTrack, which has like a 40-day boot camp, and you can basically sign on up, and there's lots of locals who are doing this out of duty, like they want to give back, and it's just enough of a paycheck that they can provide, and they work on a rotation. They go through the shit to get that ticket to become a ranger, and that's
cool.
Brutal. And then you have I want to say it's Mozambique, but maybe it's even Kenya, an all-female anti-poaching unit, and I think they're called the Black Mambas.
That's right.
You're actually in that pitch deck. We used a picture from a National Geographic piece on them, and they're incredible too. So there's more and more and more. Vetpor is, they're quite well funded through like Richard Branson and another guy who runs a group called Kamagawa, and they are like elite special forces dudes. Yeah, and they haven't, I think, if I'm correct, they haven't lost a rhino since they hit the Kruger National Park.
Wow.
They're like,
that's amazing.
They're fucking insane.
It's funny, we're talking about rhinos. I was, a couple of years ago when I moved to Melbourne, and it's been only like 5 years or so. And I remember I was like, oh, the trams are so cool. And they had the stickers with the rhino. And I was
this
like,
is the same weight as 10 rhinos or whatever it is.
Exactly. Yeah. And at the time, numbers were falling really drastically in terms of rhino deaths in South Africa. And I'd worked on a project back in South Africa, and it was for the national broadcaster. And I was like, man, I was just becoming aware of just how quickly we're losing numbers of rhinos. And it was getting really hectic. So I think, shining a light on that through the people that find themselves, in that situation and are doing good. And also, like what are the circumstances that lead someone to, turn for bad and then come good again, and how does that, tell you a little bit about their humanity. I think that's cool stuff. I think that's rich grounds and material for some story. So yeah, let's keep talking.
Yeah, great. Well, I reckon you've probably got to get running, don't you? What's your time?
I am going on. Yeah, that's it. It's half past.
Perfect.
Perfect.
I think that's a good place to stop.
That's good. Yeah, good.
Hey man, I really, really appreciate you coming down.
Yeah, man.
It's really, really great to meet you after sort of Anthony talking you up for 8 months. And it's been a really, really great chat. I'm glad that it went on all these great tangents.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome, man.
Cool
Thanks
stuff.
so much. Yeah, well.